Okay, so our last video we talked about continuing and using a potentiometer, which looks like this, to control the contrast on the LCD panel. So we're going to do that. Now before we do that, we need something called as jumper cables or jumper wires to connect points from breadboard to another point or to another device. In order to do so, you can actually go to the store and buy something like this. This is a 22 gauge solid wire. You can buy a spool of this, which is basically a solid wire, so you can actually bend it whichever way you want, and then you can cut it to your desired length. Better still, you can buy something like this here. I've got a bunch of these jumper cables. I bought these from Hackmore. You can buy these from Amazon, eBay, whichever you like. What these are just pre-made jumper cables which have nice rubberized end to them. So they're all sealed and they've got nice tips that are kind of custom so that they don't break and you can reuse them. The advantage is you get color coding with the wires, so you don't really get confused while you're hooking up everything, and then these last longer. So I'm going to use these for this tutorial. Okay, so let's begin. The first thing that we'll do is we'll grab a couple of jumper cables or wires, one red and one black, and we will hook up the 5-volt power supply to the positive rail on my breadboard, and the ground rail would be hooked up to the ground or the Arduino like so. So it's fairly straightforward. In the power section of your Arduino, you've got two 5-volt and 3-volt supply and ground, so that's what I've used here. The next thing that we will do is that we will hook up the power to our LCD display from the breadboard. So for that, I'm going to grab a couple of jumper cables here. Let me grab a smaller one. And pin 16 and pin 15 are what we are interested in. So pin 16 will go basically on the breadboard to the ground pin, and pin 15 would go to my power. Now let's really quick connect the Arduino. I'm going to power up the Arduino. You can either use a 9-volt power supply if you want to make it standalone, of course. But for my development purposes, I use the USB. So I'm going to connect via USB. So as soon as I hook it up, you see the LCD display powers up, right? So you can see the backlit, the LED backlight has come up. Now at this point, we don't really have much control over the contrast or the way the characters are going to be displayed on the LCD panel. So we need to adjust the contrast. For that, we are going to be using the potentiometer like I mentioned before. So let's disconnect and continue that work. For that, let's take the potentiometer and place it. I'm going to place it on the breadboard adjacent to this breadboard, just so that I have more room. So I have two breadboards kind of sitting next to one another. And I am going to wire it in a manner where I take the two ends of the potentiometer. So potentiometer has 3 wires basically. So the two ends, basically the very left and the very right, they go to ground and power. It doesn't matter which one goes to which. All that you need to do is hook them up, one to ground and one to power. The middle pin of the potentiometer is going to be hooked up to pin number 3 of the LCD panel, like so. Next step, I'm going to grab a couple of more jumper cables, and I'm going to connect my pin 1 of the LCD panel to ground and pin 2 to my plus 5 volts. So this is our setup here. It's getting a little messier now, and that's what happens when you have a lot of hookups, but this is what it looks right now. and let's power it back on again. Now at this point, if you rotate the potentiometer, you can notice here that I can actually control the contrast on my LCD display. So what we've done here is that we've first given the basic power supply to the LCD panel that brought up the backlight. Then what we did was we hooked up the potentiometer and we used pin 3 of the LCD panel, which is basically the contrast control pin, which basically controls, you know, the supply to the display. And then we hooked up pin 1 and 2 to the power supply, which is the logic controller. So the backlight versus logic are two different things. And that's what's controlling the contrast here, because the pot is connected via that circuit and it's controlling the exact amount of current that's going to my LCD panel. So the next step would be now to control the characters on the LCD panel. So let's do that. So for that, let's disconnect and then start another video, part 3 in the series, that'll show up how to hook this up to the digital outs of the Arduino to actually control what gets displayed on the LCD panel. So see you soon.